I do want to offer a big thank you as well to the folks who came yesterday and helped us unload and pack our stuff into the storage unit yesterday. I took the welcome mat from our old house and I kind of jokingly laid it in front of the storage unit where it says home, because right now that's kind of home. But after spending the whole week packing, it was a welcome sight to see people walking out of their cars and up to the U-Haul to help us unload. When times like these occur, I think to myself, I don't know what I would do without family and without God's family. Because the last week's been spent packing and reminiscing, and your help was very much a relief as we've neared the end of that. I've been thinking, because of that, a lot about my physical house, right? A lot about the house to come, a lot about the old house that we're hopefully going to be closing on this week in Ohio. John and I spent 3 years, and the kids, I should include them, working on a fixer-upper house that we started to kind of turn into our dream home. And we walked away from it to come here, and Lord willing, the buyers are going to sign on that Wednesday, and that part of our life in Ohio will come to a close. So keep that in your prayers. I hope that it will be a blessing to them. Our last 2 houses have consisted of a bank repo and a fixer-upper. When we moved into the house that we were just in, I thought Jonna was going to cry. She saw all the work and everything that was going to have to be done, and tears kind of filled her eyes. And I told her, we need to view the house the way the Lord views people. With a little love, we can turn people into what they ought to be. The Lord can turn people into what they ought to be. And with little love, we can do that with the house too, right? And I know a lot of you had similar experiences with things like that. Our physical houses can turn into a lot of work, and they can consume a lot of our focus. But much more so than our physical houses, today, I'd like to focus with you about what the house should mean to us spiritually. What the house should mean to us spiritually. In the Bible, the term house is used as either an illustration or a figure of speech. And so as my family and I are preparing to move into our new house, and in the process of it being built and getting ready for life in our new home, I began thinking about not what things should be like with our physical house, but what should our spiritual house be like? I'm not talking about the physical blueprints. We're talking about what are the spiritual blueprints for a healthy home. In Scripture, the term household, it refers to families. In Hebrews 11, verse 7, it talks about Noah. It says, Noah prepared an ark for the saving of his household. That household was his family. The household in Bible is the family. In 2 Samuel chapter 3 and verse 1, you read about this war that exists between the house of Saul and the house of David. This is the family of Saul and the family of David. We aren't talking about their physical homes in those places. We're talking about the family. In 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 4, one of the qualifications of an elder there was that he rule his own house well. We're not talking about organizing his physical home. We're talking about his children in the context of that. And so that's family. What ought to be, when it comes to our family, what ought to be our spiritual house plans? What kind of house will we have? So let me give you a few ideas. As we think about our families and as we think about our spiritual home, we need to have a house with a good foundation. Jesus teaches that, right? In Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 through 27, it says this, Therefore, whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him to a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain descended, the floods came, the winds blew and beat on that house, and it did not fall, for it was founded on the rock. But everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain descended, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. Notice something here. It doesn't matter if you've got that home that's built on a good foundation or that home that is built on the sand foundation. Storms are going to come your way. So it doesn't matter if you're a church member or a non-church member, storms will come your way. Rains will fall, winds will blow. That happened to both of these people. The difference here is the people who were able to sustain the winds and the rains and the floods were the people who had built their house on the rock. What does that mean? Well, we're not talking about a physical rock. Jesus explains what he's talking about in Matthew 7. When you build your house on the rock, you're building your house on the Lord. It's the people who hear what he says and does what he says who have built their homes on the rock. I want to suggest to you, our opening verse in Psalm 127 verse 1 was this: unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. When you start off building a family, building a home, if you want that home to be solid, you don't build it on sports, you don't build it on money, you don't build it on education. You build that home on the Lord. If the Lord doesn't build the house, you're laboring in vain. Joshua says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. He wasn't talking about the four walls. My family was going to serve the Lord. That was going to be important to Joshua. If you're going to have a solid family, a solid home, it needs to be a home that is built upon the Lord. Houses need to be places that are offering more than just food and shelter. The spiritual teaching needs to be shared. The spiritual food, the spiritual drink, those things need to be shared to help lay the foundation for a life that is pleasing to God. And only then, 2 Timothy chapter 2 verse 20 says that we can be a vessel for honor, sanctified and useful for the master, prepared for every good work. Only when your house and family is built on the Lord can you be useful for the Lord and the work that he intends for you to do. And so we need houses with a good foundation. That's what you would look for in a physical house, isn't it? When you go to buy a home, if you see a foundation that is messed up, you should run away quickly. Well, that's what we need to see when it comes to our spiritual houses and our families. We need to set a good foundation, and that foundation is the Lord. The Lord needs to be the centerpiece of our home, the foundation of our home. Notice the second passage, though, where the word house is used in a way that we could perhaps extend the metaphor just a little bit. We need to have a house that is full of light. Notice Matthew 5, a familiar passage that Brother Chris read to us earlier. It says, "You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand. And it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." I want to take a look at that phrase there that maybe we don't emphasize as much. A lot of times we focus on the light of the world, and a lot of times we focus on shining. But I want you to focus on that phrase, it gives light to all who are in the house. We were in the little apartment that we're going to be living in for the next few months, and I was in the corner of our little kitchen, and Jonna flipped on the light. She said, "Oh, there's a light back here." I've been in that apartment every week, pretty much, for the past 6 weeks, and I'd been thinking to myself, it's really dark in this corner. And she walks in there for the first day, and she finds the light. If I turned on the light, maybe it wouldn't have been so dark. So I'm glad to know that there's a light there. That's the purpose of light. It lights up the house. We can see better. Most people don't like stumbling around in the darkness, not being able to see. We want our homes, our families, we want our homes to be well lit so that we can clearly see. And that takes enlightenment. Look at another passage, Ephesians 5, verses 8 through 11. Ephesians 5 and verse 8. It says, "For you were once darkness." Let me turn there. Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 8. It says, "You were once darkness." That's how we were before we came to the Lord. You were once walking in darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light, for the fruit of the Spirit is in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. As I think about my family plan, I want a family that is full of light. We're not talking about physical light. We're not talking about a house physically that's full of light. Well, that's nice. We're talking about a family where the people who are part of the home are people of light. What does that mean? It means that we are people of goodness. And you can't be good without knowing God, who is good. He gets to define what goodness is. We need to have families of righteousness. Look at verse 9. We don't know what righteousness is. We don't know what right versus wrong is without God, who defines the right and the wrong for us. We're families of truth. There's this idea that it's floating around, and I think it's really permeating a lot of the issues that we debate. But the idea is that truth is relative, that you've got your truth and I've got my truth and you've got your truth, and we've all just got different truths. Just live your truth. No, truth is objective. Jesus is the truth. His word is the source of truth. There is a right and there is a wrong. In my family, I want my family to be people of truth, who understand that right and wrong because they know Jesus. Only then, when we know what true goodness and rightness and truth is, will we be people of light. Finding out what is acceptable to the Lord. That's key in your home. I don't care what the world thinks is okay. I don't care what your friends think is okay. I don't care what some of my family members think is okay. I care about what the Lord says is okay. And if the Lord okays it, we can be a family of light. Verse 11 says, part of being a family of light is you've got to expose darkness. Verse 11 says, have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. That's really why I love this picture here, right? Some of you, maybe you're familiar with Thomas Kinkade, the painter of lights, but I like some of Kinkade. You know, there's a lot of light in his pictures, but that's the point, right? But I like this picture because it kind of shows us a lot of the different things that light does. And we see it physically here in the picture that you see on your screen. The light, notice the headlights on the car. Notice how they're shining on the ice. Notice that when you can see the ice, the light exposes the danger, right? That's one of the things that light does. Light exposes the danger that is ahead. Notice the lights along the edge of the driveway, though. What does it do? Light guides us. And so if we are people of light, we are people who are guides to other people. They can actually look at our lives because we are following the light of the world, and they can be guided in their own lives on how to live them better. Light just simply makes things beautiful. Look at the lights on the trees. Look at the lights in the house. Light just makes things beautiful. I think people who live good lives and righteous lives are people who are beautiful, especially from God's perspective. Think about the opposite of that. The opposite of goodness is badness. I think people that are bad, that are rotten, that are evil, those aren't beautiful people to me. They're dangerous people. They're toxic people. They're scary people, people that I want to get away from. And so as you lay down your house plans, your house needs to be a house that is a house of light, exposing the danger, guiding the path, shining in the dark places. When people visit your home, then, how will they answer the question that the prophet Isaiah once asked King Hezekiah? Isaiah once said, and you see it noted in 2 Kings 20 and verse 15, what have they seen in your house? When people come to your home, as your families and your children leave your home, how would they answer that question? What have they seen in your house? Have they seen you standing up to evil or compromising with it? Have they seen you, and can they say that you have been an example to them of godliness and goodness and what a Christian should be? Or have they seen hypocrisy? Can they say, my mom is the most beautiful person that I've ever known because of who you are as a godly Christian? My father is a good man, a servant of the Lord. Have they seen that in your house? If we have houses that are full of light, then I pray that they have seen those things. And I'm not saying that we're perfect. Hopefully, they've also seen the need to ask for forgiveness and to confess wrong and to admit that we're not perfect and we have to be willing to be merciful and gracious to one another. That's part of being a house full of light. But that needs to be part of our house plans. Houses that have a good foundation, houses that have light. I wouldn't want to buy a house without electricity in it, would you? I like to have some light in my home. And spiritually speaking, we need to have that as well. Notice also, we need to have a house of unity. A house of unity. Take a look at Matthew 12:25, and Jesus takes this illustration in a different direction for us. He says in verse 25, as he speaks of the necessity of a united house, he says, Jesus, who knew their thoughts, said to them, every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself will not stand. A house divided against itself will not stand. It is so important, young people, as you think about getting married to someone, if that's what you want to do. That's certainly not what you're required to do. Singleness is just as valuable in different ways as marriage is. Paul was single. Paul talks about how you can serve the Lord in some wonderful ways when you are single in 1 Corinthians 7. But if you are deciding to get married, it is important for you to consider getting married to someone where you're on the same page spiritually. Not being unequally yoked against one another, because it gets really hard to parent when you're divided spiritually with one another. There's going to be some tough decisions that are going to have to be made if you choose to enter into that covenant, that contract, and you're not on the same page spiritually. This is one of the impressive features of Joshua's statement. As for me, in my house, it suggests family unity in the spiritual realm. Family unity. God intended for families to work together as a unit. And that certainly is much easier to do when we're on the same page spiritually. Look at Genesis chapter 18. We'll just look at a couple different passages here. Genesis chapter 18 and verse 19. Notice one of the reasons that God chooses Abraham, he says, is I have known him in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him. God chose Abraham because he saw in Abraham someone who was going to not only live for him, but he was going to pass that on to his children. And he does, right? Isaac and Jacob, who are also the children of promise. In Ephesians chapter 6, notice verses 1 through 4. Ephesians chapter 6, as you focus on the parenting that's mentioned in this passage, verse 1 says, children, obey your parents in the Lord. Can I ask you a question? Parents, isn't it going to be much harder to get our children to obey them in the Lord if we are not on the same page when it comes to the Lord? Children, obey your parents in the Lord. The implication of that passage is that we are both, as father and mother, trying to teach our children the ways of the Lord. It's going to be tough for our children to obey us in the Lord if we're not on the same page there at the start. For this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. It's better for your family is a suggestion here. And you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. Sometimes we think to ourselves, well, it's okay if my husband's not a Christian, I can handle the spiritual side of things. Well, God intended for the fathers to be involved in the spiritual upbringing of the children. Don't you leave that to mom. That's your job too, Dad. Your job is to also train them up and bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. We've got to be united. Notice 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 7. Just one more passage before we move on from this point. But we need to have houses of unity. In 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 7, it says, husbands, dwell with them. We're talking about your wives here in verse in the context. Husbands, dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered. Doesn't the idea, your prayers, suggest that mom and dad are praying together with one another for the betterment of the family? What a beautiful thing to think that we are not just united when it comes to our marriage, but we are united spiritually. And what a beautiful thing to think our prayers, as they are offered to God, are offered in a united fashion, praying that his will be done. And so we need houses of unity. That's going to be part of our plan. We want to be united in how we're going to live our lives together. We also notice that in Scripture, the house was a place of welcome. And this, I thought, fit in well with our theme this year, where we're focused on service and love and hospitality. You see that with the physical home in various passages of Scripture. Let's start in Luke 10 and verse 38. We read of Jesus, and we read that a certain woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And so I want a house that's not just for my family. I want a house that's also for my spiritual family. And I want to use this physical home to introduce spiritually minded people into my home. That's what Martha did. And wouldn't you say that Martha and Mary were better for it because they invited Jesus into their home? Keep on going, though, and look in Luke chapter 19. Jesus tried to get into people's homes. You know, sometimes it's hard to have conversations with people that you need to have about spiritual things when you're in a big group. And sometimes it's easier to have those conversations when we go into someone's home and we have those face-to-face, heart-to-heart conversations. And I think that's what Jesus is doing here with Zacchaeus. When Jesus came to the place, there's a multitude of people there. It wasn't the right place to have an important conversation. Really, he looked up and saw little Zacchaeus in the tree, and he said, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must stay at your house. Do you notice what Jesus did there? He invited himself over. To think, you know, what would you think if somebody said, hey, I'm going to come over to your house tonight? And it did. Now you guys, okay, let's have this conversation. So to keep it real, you did say that if you ever want to come over, just let us know, all right? So, but you're right. They said it, and I said, hey, Vernon and Susan, I need a place to stay tonight. I'm coming. Oh, that was fun. Vernon, you're going to have to talk to her later. In Acts 2 and verse 46, it says, continuing daily with one accord in the temple. Notice what the church was doing. Breaking bread from house to house. Now, the church wasn't doing this as a whole. The church wasn't sponsoring meals for people and building large areas so that they could feed people. No, they were doing this on an individual basis. From house to house, on an individual basis, people were getting to know one another and developing relationships with one another. And they ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart. We see some beautiful things about the early church as we notice these little phrases about the house. Notice one more. In Acts 16 and verse 15, after Paul teaches Lydia, it says, when she and her household were baptized, she begged us, saying, if you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come to my house and stay. Isn't that awesome? A brand new Christian. And she says, Paul, I know you've taught me a little bit, but I know you can teach me some more. And you might even need a place to stay while you're here teaching in Philippi. So come to my house and stay. And it says she persuaded us. You know, some people, they say that, just call me anytime. Some people really persuade you, right? I want you to come. Come to my house. Let's spend some time together. Our houses need to provide welcoming moments of companionship and comfort and camaraderie to others outside of our family. Romans 12 and verse 13 says we should be given to hospitality. That should be just something, I like the idea of given to hospitality, almost like it's natural. It should feel natural for us to have people in our homes and to be in their homes. Why? Because we're family. I don't have to really call my parents and tell them I'm coming, although they do appreciate a prior phone call. I'm family. I'm welcome into their home anytime I want. They could drop by my home when I had a home, and anytime they wanted, and just stop in, and I'd give them a place to stay, and I'd give them some food to eat, because we're family. It's natural. And it should be natural with us as brothers and sisters in Christ to be with one another in one another's homes. We see that culture in the first century church, even before the church was established, into the time the church was established. And certainly, I think it's going to be valuable to us if we can continue to see it. So, question for you, if you could put out a welcome mat, I mean, when you think about your life and you throw out that welcome mat, what would it say? Because you do get this vibe with some people that they really don't want you at their home. Would it say, go away? This one. If you did stop in, would it say, hope you told us you were coming over before you knock on the door? Go away, I'm reading. Have you seen that one? And these are welcome mats you can buy. I hope you don't. We hope you have a very good reason to make our dogs bark. Is that what it would say? Or would it truly say, you're welcome here? You're welcome. And mean it. Because sometimes the mat says it, but you don't mean it. I want to read to you, this was a Facebook story that somebody posted. This was about 3 or 4 years ago. You might have seen it way back then, but it really impacted me when I read it. Because as I read it, I just felt myself identifying with what this person was saying. But this is written by somebody named Emma Wyatt. And she writes this. It's a little bit lengthy, but I think it's encouraging. She says, when I was a newlywed, my husband asked if we could invite the visiting preacher over for supper one night. I panicked. I said no. I had just barely learned to cook. And everyone knows the only appropriate meal to feed a preacher is a pot roast, right? Let me just insert. No. I like pizza, all right? So just keep it easy. I didn't know how to cook one of those, and even if I did, we couldn't afford one. My house was tiny, the furniture hand-me-down, my confidence was lacking. Our table could sit 3 comfortably and 4 in a squeeze. I read this and it just makes me think of our first house, you know. It's like almost like tears come to my eyes because I'm just like, I understand. Did I mention our table also doubled as my counter space? So she said, Sam was disappointed, but he let it go. And eventually he asked again, and this time I gave in. I was only slightly less intimidated this time because the visiting preacher has specifically requested a light meal. So I made soup and I cut up a cantaloupe. Guess what? The soup was gratefully eaten. My tiny house was complimented. My hospitality was appreciated. She says, I didn't grow up with a community of hospitality. And can I just insert something else here? A lot of people aren't growing up in communities of hospitality. We're sitting alone in our homes with our TVs or our phones in our hands and our iPads, and we just know each other virtually, and that's about it. So she says, my family didn't really invite people over. This was a new and somewhat scary world that I was thrown into as a newlywed. It was something that I wanted to engage in, but I had my own perspective of what was expected. A big house, big meal, nice furniture, a hostess with great conversation skills. And she says, I had exactly 0 of 4 of these necessary qualities. 11 years, a bigger house, nicer furniture, and more room around the table later, I figured something out. People don't care. Someone will always have a more comfortable home for hosting. Someone will always be a better cook. Someone will always have nicer furniture and a bigger table. People care that you cared enough about them to extend an invitation. And you know what? She says, I've never cooked a pot roast for company. I've made brisket and fried chicken and enchiladas and homemade pizza and lasagna, but I've also made hot dogs and cold cuts and store-bought pizza, and I've served people bought ice cream and called it supper. And she says, it doesn't matter what you serve or if you can cook. What matters is you can open up your home. You can open up your life to someone else. I'd still like my home to be perfect for company, but with 4 kids, fat chance of that happening in the next 10 years. So she says, I can wait 10 years, or I can do the best with what I have. I think I'd much rather be cultivating relationships in my home now than wait until everything is just right. So she said, if you come over this next month, my flooring project may or may not be completed. I can pretty much guarantee that my front door handle will fall off from the inside. I might burn supper. There's a good chance I'll forget all about making dessert, but I'll enjoy your company, and I hope you'll enjoy mine. Some of the most influential, impactful conversations that I've had with other Christians and even with my family listening have been over a dinner table somewhere or in somebody's living room. There's just some things that you don't pick up from a sermon, that you don't pick up from the corporate worship service, that you will pick up and you will learn from people when you get to know them intimately. So make that a part of your house plan, to have a family, to have a house that is a house of welcoming. But here's one more. Here's one more thing that I want you to consider, and that is that we need to have houses of worship. A house of worship. Notice it says in John chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, who had been dead, whom he had raised from the dead, and there they made him a supper, and Martha served. But Lazarus was one of those who sat at the table with him. That must have been pretty awesome. Lazarus is raised from the dead in John 11, and here in John 12, he's eating dinner again. A few days earlier, people thought this was the last time we're ever going to see him in his casket. We're putting him in his grave. We're never going to see him again. And Lazarus is at dinner. And Mary took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard, anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. I want to suggest to you that this is an act of worship that Mary is offering to Jesus, who is worthy of worship. Would you be able to say that your house is also a house, a family of worship? A house where you can pray together, a house where you can sing together. I told my kids the other day, they're getting older, and I miss having little kids. I've got 3 teenagers. I miss having little kids. And I said, I'm not trying to rush you guys into being grandparents or anything, but I can't wait till I got a little baby again so I can sit there and just sing hymns to him. I'm looking forward to that day at some point. So that when they get to know my voice, they know a voice of song and a voice of praise and a voice of worship. I want that. We gathered the kids last night as we got to the apartment. John and I are living in an apartment right above my parents' garage, and the kids are living with grandparents, which is going to stress them out all summer. And so we said, you guys need to come here, and at night, we need to spend some time together. We're not going to live these 2 separate homes. You're going to come here, and we're going to eat together, and we're going to talk together, and we're going to pray together, and we're going to study together, and that's going to be part of our culture and what we just do this summer. Because I want you to remember this. I want you to remember this summer. And I want it to be impactful, and I want it to be good. I want our house to be a house of worship. A family where God comes first, and God is important, and Jesus is glorified, and Jesus is talked about in our home with respect and with admiration. That needs to be a part of our home, part of our house, part of our house plans, people of worship. You know, we want our families to be all of these things. But remember, the family of God is called a house too. Paul says in 1 Timothy 3:15, he says, I write so that you may know how you ought to conduct yourself in the house of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and ground of the truth. The church is also a family. We also need to be having plans as a church to be all these things. Doesn't it make sense that if our homes are built on a good foundation, if they're full of light, if they're emphasizing unity, if they're sharing hospitality, enjoying worship, the church is going to be all of that too. If all of us make that part of our focus as families, when we come together, this is going to be our focus as God's family as well. So how do we get started? How do we get started building a home like this? Because this is very different than the world. The only way that you can build a home like this is if you start tearing down the old foundations and you start laying a new one with Jesus Christ. Ecclesiastes 3:3 says there's a time to break down and there's a time to build up. So maybe for you, it's time that we tear out the old foundation and we start building a new one, God's way, on the sure rock of Jesus Christ. Tearing down is hard work, but building new is fulfilling, it's rewarding, especially with the great promises that we have in Jesus Christ. So you ready to start building? This all kind of leads me to my last point. Have you heard of the parable of the unjust steward? We'll just summarize it. It's in Luke chapter 16, but it's a parable about a man who was afraid that he was going to lose his job, which was going to lead to him losing his home. And he found a way to settle some debts with some accounts to save face and to win some friends. The parable is a lot of times debated. Unlike many parables that just kind of have one main point, Jesus attaches at least 4 different conclusions to it, which makes it one of the more complicated parables. But one of the conclusions is this. One of the conclusions is make friends for yourselves by means of the wealth of unrighteousness so that when it fails, they will receive you into the eternal dwellings. Some versions say they will receive you into their homes, their everlasting homes. Jesus actually commends the quick actions of the steward, and he says the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than the sons of light. What's his point? Frankly, when this guy was about to lose his house, he did the best he could to save it. He acted with urgency. He saw the writing on the wall. He did what was necessary. And so what about you? One of the lessons that I've tried to impress upon my kids is that we're all going to leave a house behind at some point in time. Sometimes we leave it because of job transfers. Sometimes we grow out of it. Sometimes we lose our homes. They catch on fire. They get destroyed in tornadoes. Sometimes we move out of our homes after college. Sometimes we get married. Sometimes we downsize. If none of this happens, listen to what's going to happen. You're going to die and you're going to get carried out of a house one day. And so we can't be living for these earthly homes. One day, God is going to want to settle accounts with you. We're leaving these houses behind, so let's start living, doing what is necessary now to shrewdly and quickly and act with urgency, start living for the eternal home that Jesus has prepared for his family. Because Judgment Day is coming. Whether we're going to enter into our heavenly home, it has everything to do with what we're going to make our homes today.